The radios were filled with noise. Half the team was calling targets. The other half was calling for help. Grid references overlapped. No one could lock down the breach. Nora sat at the edge of the command tent, headset silent, notebook open. She had seen the drift hours ago. She had marked the fallback trail no one believed in. While the officers argued, she toggled her channel and gave the coordinates. Calm. Exact. No one told her to. No one stopped her. Minutes later, the breach ended where her pencil had drawn it, and the room finally went quiet. The interior of the Joint Tactical Operations Center pulsed with artificial light, cooled air, and the faint electric buzz of active feeds. Laptops hummed beside ruggedized monitors, cables snaked across the floor under boot soles, and laminated maps curled at the edges from humidity. The jungle outside pressed in with heat and weight, but inside, the talk belonged to a different rhythm part calculation. Part theater. Specialist Nora Layton sat in the rear quadrant at Station 3, her posture composed, headset in place. Her uniform was regulation but bore the texture of long field wear. The cord to her headset was wrapped once with green tape where the insulation had started to fray. Her grease pencil, snapped and retaped, rested beside her hand-plotted notebook. She had spent the morning tracking movement reports from unmanned aerial systems and syncing indirect fire overlays to terrain drift. Everything she needed was analog, even as the screens around her streamed digital noise. Around her, the room buzzed with clipped voices and constant motion. A visiting group of officers from Australia and the United Kingdom lingered near the map boards, drinking coffee and occasionally pointing out trajectory models. In the center of the room, First Lieutenant Delgado stood beside the fire control panel. His voice was calm, but broadcast ready, pitched for the room. He wore his confidence like a badge. All right, team, walk me through current fire priority. Which grid is closest to confirmed movement? A sergeant from Bravo Fires leaned in. Grid Bravo 27. Last drone pass picked up heat bloom east of the waterline. Delgado nodded. FDC has elevation. They've got it pre-cleared to 100.0. Smoke on in 90 seconds if we confirm. Nora looked down at her own overlay. A heat bloom. Yes, but not the right pattern. The drift was off. She adjusted the protractor on her notebook, tracing a faint arc across the ridgeline. Wind pattern, slope angle, rate of movement. They didn't match. Bravo 27. She tapped her mic once. Recommend shift to Delta 36, she said. Her voice was even, quiet. Thermal displacement there matches forward movement consistent with known OP4 behavior. Suggest marking round on Delta 36. 5 rounds impact. 307 mils from current tube. For a moment, there was only the soft click of typing and the creak of a chair. Then Sergeant First Class Mathis let out a chuckle. Well, that's a new voice. Delgado didn't look back. Appreciate the analysis. Specialist Layton, but we're sticking with confirmed vectors. Let's stay on target. One of the Australian officers raised an eyebrow and said, just loud enough. Bit keen for a relay tech. Isn't she? Someone else smirked. The comment wasn't cruel, just the kind that lands, quiet and certain, in a room where rank decides tone. Nora said nothing. She pressed one corner of her page flat and added a mark beside Delta 36. Then she drew a line through it. Delgado turned back toward the digital map feed. Bravo call stands. FDC, you're cleared. Let me know, Splash. The noise resumed. Comms chatter escalated. The data wall flickered as feeds refreshed. One British captain flipped his notepad closed and resumed a conversation about blast radius simulations. Nora leaned back slightly, adjusted her headset, and resumed logging transmission drift. Her grease pencil moved slowly across the page, tracing a silent correction no one asked for. She erased nothing, just made room. To her left, a junior radio operator glanced her way, almost said something, then looked back at his screen. Her corner of the room stayed quiet. Outside, the jungle remained still. The artillery landed on Bravo 27 exactly as planned. On screen. The dust plume rose. No one cheered. No one questioned. The next grid lit up, ready for evaluation. Delgado was already onto the next sequence, fielding input from another captain standing closer to the display. Nora flipped her page over. Her grease pencil caught slightly on the paper's edge, then flowed clean. She logged the time, not the result, just the time. No one called on her again. She adjusted the tape over her headset cord and pressed the spiral of her notebook closed. Her left thumb hovered briefly over the mark she had made beside Delta 36. She had gotten the pattern right, just not loud enough for the room to hear it. Then, as always, she returned to work. The generator behind the observation shack kicked twice and settled into a low mechanical hum. It was nearly midnight, and the heat had collapsed into a heavy stillness. From this corner of the jungle edge, the main talk was a distant glow behind two curtains of camo netting. The laughter and low command chatter barely reached her now. That was the point. Nora sat on a field stool inside the temporary recon post. The red lamp dome above her workstation buzzed softly. She had tilted the light down with a strip of electrical tape to cut the backscatter. Her grease pencil moved steadily across the acetate overlay. Each mark precise and matched to her hand-plotted range ring. A terrain gradient sheet was taped to one side. Beside it, thermal shift data from two separate drone flyovers had been printed in thin, ghosted ink. She aligned the acetate over a low-resolution topographical map and began her checks again. She didn't trust the automated overlays. They made assumptions. She traced the known footpaths, but also the deviations, where brush cleared at unnatural angles, where the thermal return faded just enough to imply movement masked by foil blankets. Her adjustments were small, deliberate, where the others chased bright spots on glossy screens. She focused on timing, slope angle, and ingress feasibility. From a pocket in her left sleeve, she pulled a laminated card worn at the corners, the colors bleached by sweat and time. On one side, a faded photo showed a Marine in full gear kneeling beside a tripod-mounted sight. Her mother. The back was marked in permanent ink with fire solution notes. Nora slid it beneath her elbow and kept working. She ran a range bracket calculation by hand, adjusted for angle of fall, cross-checked with observer target line, and shifted her azimuth 3 degrees west. The data lined up again. Delta 36. Not a guess. Not a feeling. A verified vector with matching thermal displacement and line-of-sight elevation advantage. She circled it lightly. Twice. Then she traced the surrounding terrain marking the overgrown saddle, the dry creek bed, the last visible drone ping. The timing of the last simulated OPFOR breach aligned with every element she had modeled. There was no doubt. She leaned back and reviewed her work. The shack was quiet except for the soft pulse of the generator and the steady chirp of a jungle bird that had claimed the post's tin roof. Sweat traced a path between her shoulder blades. The paper beneath her wrist was faintly damp, but the lines held. She opened her notebook and rewrote the fire mission manually observer position. Target grid, shell type, number of rounds, remarks. She pressed hard enough for the pencil to leave a faint groove beneath the paper. Then she tore the page neatly along the spine and folded it twice. Sharp and clean. The field slip fit snug in the webbing pocket of her chest rig. Outside, the air barely moved. She stepped out of the shack, boots whispering across plywood planks. A lone fire direction NCO stood by the ops trailer smoking a field-rolled cigarette. He didn't speak when she approached. She held out the slip. He took it without looking, tucked it into a clipboard, and lit another match. He exhaled and said nothing. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. That wasn't the point either. Back inside, she peeled off one glove and rotated the acetate again. Just past the final contour line, she added a light mark for fallback movement where the OPFOR team would likely push if the breach failed. She didn't smile. She didn't even nod. She returned the laminated photo to its sleeve pocket, tapping the edge once to flatten it. It was the only personal item she kept in uniform, and it stayed hidden beneath the Velcro every day. She sat back down and made one final notation on her terrain sheet. A single arrow, angled east, marked with a faint bracket, not for anyone else, just for her. Somewhere near the horizon, the first edge of morning was beginning to bleed through the mist canopy. The light hadn't reached the talk yet. No one had seen her move. No one had asked her to verify anything. She had mapped the breach before they saw it. She clipped the overlays shut inside her notebook, folded her map, and tucked the grease pencil into the elastic loop on her vest. Then she looked up through the dim red light, hands resting still on the edge of the desk, and waited for dawn. The sun had just cleared the ridge when the Calfex went hot. Call signs rotated in quick sequence across the network, each element announcing position, status, and munitions ready. The simulation was designed to replicate battlefield saturation. The talk hummed with layered voices, shifting maps, and the pressurized energy of people who believed they had the right answers. Everyone leaned in. Specialist Nora Layton sat exactly where she had the day before. Her posture hadn't changed, but her focus had narrowed to a fine, unblinking point. The new movement data pulsing across her console showed a deviation small, but confirmed. The Op-4 team wasn't pushing through Grid Bravo. They were baiting it. The pattern of heat bloom, the angle of deviation, and the subtle timing all matched the breach rehearsal she had plotted the night before. Delta 36. She toggled her mic and kept her voice level. Recommend fire shift to Delta 36. Movement pattern matches Op-4 breach behavior from Phase 2. Wind drift confirms line of sight. Request marking round and 4 follow-on. Bracket at 307 mils. There was a moment of silence on Net 2. Then a slow, deliberate reply came through the internal channel. Sergeant First Class Mathis said her name like it was part of a joke already circulating. Specialist Grid guest back in the chair. Didn't get enough spotlight yesterday. Someone near the center console laughed. Nora didn't flinch. She tapped her screen and began calculating the fallback position in silence. She had spoken once. This was twice. That was usually too much. First, Lieutenant Delgado didn't look at her. He scanned the shared screen with his stylus and waved a hand slightly, still facing the operations board. Thanks for your input. Specialist Layton. But we're locked onto Bravo for this phase. No adjustments at this time. Captain Rayner, a liaison officer from the British Fires Element, leaned back in his chair, watching the grid projection. She's keen. I'll give her that. But maybe let the drill play out. Yeah. Mathis followed with, she just likes the sound of her own correction. The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. In a room like this, tone traveled faster than rank. Nora's headset shifted slightly as she leaned forward again. The left ear cup had a broken seal that let ambient noise bleed in. She adjusted it. Not to hear better, but to hear less, Delgado continued, directing the FDC to hold Bravo fire coordination. The net filled with confirmations. A new drone ping was called. The artillery team marked their countdown. The data wall updated with impact times and color-coded indicators. Grid Bravo lit up across 5 displays. Not one of them showed Delta 36. Nora opened her notebook. She wrote the grid again by hand. Same azimuth, same bracket, same shell count. Her grease pencil left a faint dent across the paper. She folded the target slip once, then again, and slipped it under her keyboard. It would not be logged. Not officially. Across the tent, someone said something in a low voice. She didn't catch the words, only the way another officer smiled faintly without looking in her direction. Someone nearby tapped out a message on a shared tablet. She could hear the quiet response. She's still on it, followed by the unmistakable rhythm of a screen swipe. Nora didn't respond. She wasn't in the room for them. The artillery countdown reached 0. A synthetic impact animation lit up Bravo on the projection. No one clapped, but someone muttered, "Clean, burn." Delgado nodded like he had expected it all along. No one questioned the direction. The scenario advanced. The talk flowed forward. Specialist Layton, Delgado said again, voice flat now. Stand by for further tasking. No additional inputs unless directed. She acknowledged with a simple, copy, Nothing more. No one looked at her. The comment had landed, and the hierarchy had realigned. The net shifted focus. The moment was done. She pressed her lips together and reached for her notebook once more. She flipped back to the previous page and marked the corner of Delta 36 with a faint circle. Then she drew a line beneath it, not through it. The grid still mattered. It just didn't belong to them yet. Outside, the jungle stayed quiet. Inside, the room pulsed with updates and digital noise. Nora adjusted the notebook under her palm, clenched her left hand once to ease the pressure in her wrist, and returned to her station. The target was still there. The breach was coming. But no one was listening. The first report came in like static through a speaker, sharp, clipped, and too fast to process. A breach, they said. Delta 36. Nora didn't need to look up. The moment the call came across Net 2, her pencil was already in motion. The icon blinked red on the upper screen. Then another, and another. The map fed by drone telemetry updated in real time, a cascade of simulated hostile signals blooming across the very grid she had circled twice in silence. Across the talk, chairs creaked and boots shifted. The room began to tilt. Say again, Delgado barked from center command. What grid? The drone operator's voice was loud and clear. OPFOR breach confirmed at Delta 36. Blue 25 neutralized in SIM. Repeat. Enemy units inside the lateral perimeter. Heads turned. SFC Mathis stared at his screen, then back to his folded map. He looked like he'd lost his place. They weren't supposed to be there. He muttered. Bravo was cleared. Bravo had movement. A junior analyst replied without confidence. Thermal signature drifted east last recon pass. Might have been a masked rotation. No one briefed Delta, said one of the liaison officers. I did, Nora said quietly. No one turned. No one heard her. The radios lit up again, this time layered. One line bled into another. This is Blue 2-1. Contact on rear flank marking smoke now. Overwatch confirms movement 3 squads. Mixed signature. No marking. Where the hell is our counter battery? Delgado snapped toward the FDC table. Do we have rounds on deck? A lieutenant shook his head. None cleared for Delta. Mortars repositioning. Tubes still cold. We don't have line of sight, said Mathis, flipping through his notes. The slope blocks grid 3-6 from all angle clears. Nora reached for her map overlay. Already open. The pencil in her hand hovered above the fallback trail she'd drawn 12 hours earlier. Every movement unfolding on screen was a match. Every vector lined up. Retask guns, Delgado ordered. Get suppression on the ridge. We can't. One of the fire direction techs said, no observer, no bracket, no confirmation. They're walking over us, said a new voice. It cracked slightly under pressure. This is Sergeant Callan. We've got no cover. They're behind our line. We need fire now. The net fractured. Multiple teams began speaking at once. Fragmented grid numbers. Conflicting bearings. Static from handsets that had never been tested in terrain this steep. Delgado raised his voice. Silence the channel. I need one clear report. The room didn't go silent. Not completely. Someone near the back was still calling for coordinates. An allied captain suggested requesting rotary wing support. Another asked whether to simulate a retreat. They're already in the perimeter, the drone operator said. There's no line left to hold. On the screen, Bravo's markers began to blink gray. Units eliminated. Simulation over for that flank. The digital overlay couldn't keep up with the cascade of failures. Nora unfolded her original grid slip. It was slightly crumpled from where she'd tucked it under her keyboard. Delta 36. Still visible. Still circled. She didn't say a word. Mathis was on one knee now. Maps spread across the floor. He barked at a tech to bring up old terrain sheets. His hands shook slightly as he tried to find a fallback point. Nora had already marked one. The ink had dried hours earlier. Delgado turned to the FDC again. Can we drop anything, he asked. Anything at all. We can try a cold shot, said the lead technician. But we don't have range. We're blind. We're firing into fog. Do it, Delgado snapped. We can't lose another platoon. Nora watched the whole thing unfold without moving. The radios flared again. A second breach alert came in west of the original. She had predicted that too. It was in the margin of her notebook, bracketed and underlined. No one asked for her notebook. Blue 2-1. This is talk. Stand by for suppression. The channel crackled. Correction inbound. Hold position. Colin's voice cut through like a blade. We're out of position. They're moving under smoke. We need impact now or we're out. The FDC called back. Negative rounds. No bracket. Target grid invalid. Delgado turned and looked across the room. Who gave us this layout, he asked. Where is the fallback protocol? None was submitted, came the answer from one of the junior staff. We didn't brief a fallback. The red icons on the display multiplied. The entire flank was blinking red now. Some of the newer personnel looked shaken. Others just stared. The talk, built on layers of simulation and rehearsed confidence, was failing in silence. Nora reached into her side pouch and pulled out a red flare. It was unused. Clean. Capped at both ends. She had pocketed it at the beginning of the week. Just in case. She set it quietly on the table beside her map. She could hear her own breath. Outside the walls of the tent, jungle birds had gone quiet. Even the insects held still between gusts of wind. She unfolded the last page of her notebook and laid it flat. Delta 3-6. Confirmed. Bracketed. Plotted for suppression. Ready for fire. The room around her still shouted. Still debated. Still looked for someone to blame. She placed her hand on the radio toggle and waited. The comms net crackled with broken phrases and rising volume. The screen above Nora's workstation glowed with blinking red markers, each one a simulated casualty or breach confirmation. Voices layered across the channel's field units calling for suppression. Fire direction techs requesting observer data. And officers in the TOC stepping over one another trying to wrestle control back from collapse. We don't have a bracket. We need a range. They're inside the kill box. From the corner of the room, Delgado shouted for silence. No one gave it. The drone feed lagged. Blue units were scattered. The map was unreadable chaos. And still, no one acted. Nora sat upright, headset in place. The mic was one she had repaired herself weeks ago, rewired at the joint after the solder cracked. It worked now. She had tested it daily. She toggled over to the fire net and inhaled once through her nose. This is Observer Alpha Niner, she said calmly. Type 3. Danger close. Adjust fire. Over. For a beat, nothing. Then static. A voice replied, hesitant. Say again. Caller identify. Who's requesting fire? Nora leaned into the mic, her tone steady, audible across both FireNet and local feed. Observer Alpha Niner, target grid, Delta 3-6, polar mission, direction 204 degrees, distance 1,800 meters, target description, OP4 breach element, triple column formation, in defilade. Method of engagement, high explosive, quick fuse, method of fire and control at my command. There was a pause, not confusion, just hesitation. Then the net lit up again. FDC, Roger, confirming Delta 3-6. Be advised we do not have pre-sight. Who authorized this? Nora didn't blink. I did. The net was quiet again. All chatter slowed. One of the techs in the corner froze mid-typing. Sergeant First Class Mathis looked up from a page he had just scribbled over. Delgado, standing in the center of the talk, turned toward her but didn't speak. He looked stunned, but not yet angry. Across the room, one of the British officers muttered, Did she just call a mission herself? Nora didn't respond. She was already tracking the countdown. Splash out, said the voice from FDC. She marked the 5-second countdown on the margin of her map with her grease pencil. It was the same pencil she'd used to mark the breach 12 hours ago, the same mark she'd circled twice when no one listened. Now, she drew a single line across the original circle. Complete. She looked up at the wall screen. The breach had widened. The simulated enemy column was shifting west into open terrain. Then the impacts landed. The projection shimmered. Simulated blasts flared white, then orange, and finally gray. Dust plumed along the tree line, followed by kinetic marker flares meant to simulate concussive effect. One by one, the red icons for the OP4 breach unit blinked out. Blue units stopped transmitting requests. Their position held. A silence settled over the room, not defeat, not relief, just quiet, measured and complete. A new voice came over the field channel, breathless and half laughing. "This is Callan." That saved the line. No one clapped. No one spoke. Nora set the mic down slowly, making sure it didn't clatter. Her hand returned to the table, resting beside her folded original grid slip. The paper was smudged now from the sweat along the edge of her wrist. She smoothed it flat. "To her left," someone whispered. "She called that hours ago." Matis stood with one hand on the back of his neck. Delgado took a half step forward but didn't speak. It was the first time since the exercise began that no one filled the silence with orders or questions. They simply watched her. Nora removed her headset and let it rest around her neck. Her breathing was steady, measured, unchanged. She didn't smile. She didn't offer explanation. She made a note in her notebook, just the time, the grid, and one word beside it confirmed. Her grease pencil snapped at the tip. She rotated it in her fingers, found the next edge, and drew a clean bracket around the now cleared sector. The breach had ended where her original overlay said it would. The FDC confirmed one final report: target neutralized, round assessment complete, returning to standby. Delgado finally found his voice. "Who logged that call?" Someone near the back replied, "She did." Another voice followed. "It wasn't on the schedule." "It was on her map," said someone else, quieter now. "On the wall display." The simulation continued. But the heart of it, the breach that no one could stop, was over. And the only correction that had landed was the one no one had authorized. Nora stood and unplugged her headset. She placed it gently on the table, straightened her notes, and gathered her map overlay. The red flare she'd set aside earlier was untouched. She returned it to her pouch, capped and clean. The voices behind her started to move again. Pages turned, radios reset, the exercise resumed. But the center of the room had shifted. She walked past the row of consoles without rush or hesitation. The main display reflected off the lenses of half-raised glasses and idle tablets. No one blocked her path. No one called her name. Outside, the light had changed. A pale wash of gold filtered through the tree line. It hadn't yet burned off the morning mist, but the edges of the canopy were catching fire with sunrise. The air was still damp, but cooling. The jungle, like the room behind her, had gone quiet. Inside the talk, one of the junior analysts turned to another. "Who authorized that?" The reply came from somewhere near the front. She didn't wait to be... The talk didn't reset all at once. It came back in fragments. Screens flickered as telemetry feeds stabilized. The fan above the central table kicked on with a tired rattle. A stack of printer paper shuffled itself down the tray, line by line, until the first after-action report rolled into view. No one spoke. Not yet. Nora sat at her console, hands still resting on either side of her notebook. Her headset hung loosely around her neck. The comms net, which only minutes earlier had erupted with static, now whispered in idle tones. A supply request for batteries. A routine air status check. The kind of chatter that returned once adrenaline bled off. She reached for her grease pencil and underlined the last entry in her fire log. Delta 36, 1,800 meters. Confirmed. Beneath that, she bracketed the splash time and drew a single line through the remarks column. Across the room, the AAR printer kicked again. The top page spilled into the tray with the heading bolded in black: Halt Condition Grid, Delta 36, Origin Unscheduled Correction, Specialist, Nora Layton. SFC Matis moved first. He approached the tray and picked up the slip with one hand. His posture had changed, not hunched, not casual, just still. He read the heading once, ran his thumb across the corner crease, then turned. He passed Nora on his way back toward the secondary table. She didn't look up until he paused beside her. When she did, he held the page slightly forward, not as a gesture, but as acknowledgement. "That was your grid," he said. She nodded once. "Nothing more?" Mathis nodded back and kept walking. At the main screen, Delgado remained frozen. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning the final breach trajectory. All of it matched Nora's overlay. Every line she had drawn, every angle, every fallback marker. He said nothing. Two officers in the center of the room lowered their tablets. One quietly stepped aside as Nora stood and unplugged her headset. She coiled the cord and placed it on the edge of the console. Her map overlays were already stacked and clipped, corners aligned with practiced care. She reached into her vest and retrieved the original grid slip, now slightly worn. She folded it again, placed it into the inner pouch of her chest rig, and sealed the flap. Somewhere in the corner, a junior analyst exhaled through his teeth and said to no one in particular, "She called it before the breach even opened." Another replied, "She circled it yesterday." The ambient sounds resumed. A chair creaked near the far wall. Someone reset the fan speed. A radio printer beeped as a new grid template came online, but none of it interrupted the wait in the center of the room. Nora's station. She stepped away from her chair. No rush, no announcement, just the natural shift of weight, the way someone leaves when their part is finished. A private near the data stack whispered, "Who called that shot?" The reply came just as quiet. She did. No one gave her the go. Delgado looked toward the voices, but by the time he turned, Nora was already walking past the last line of terminals. No one moved to stop her. A second lieutenant made room without being asked. One of the Australians adjusted his headset and avoided eye contact. The talk flap hung open at the far end, drawn back by a length of parachute cord. Nora reached it without pause. She adjusted the edge of her vest with one hand and stepped into the light. Morning had fully broken. The concrete apron outside the tent shimmered with early heat, but the tree canopy beyond still clung to dew. The jungle, loud in the hours before dawn, now stood quietly in retreat. Birds called from deep inside the branches. The sun struck her shadow, long and lean across the open space. She paused at the threshold and glanced once toward the sky. Nothing up there but clouds moving slow and thin. She took one breath, deep and even, then started across the concrete. Behind her, the printers kept running. Pages turned, radios cycled through routine syncs. The breach had been neutralized. The simulation reset had already begun. The only line still active was the one someone had drawn by hand. Inside the tent, SFC Mathis placed the AAR page into the mission binder. He didn't speak, just slid the binder closed and pushed it gently to the side. Delgado, for the first time, let his arms drop. He turned toward the terminal Nora had used. His eyes rested there, on the cleared screen and coiled headset. He didn't touch it. From near the rear console, a soft voice carried through the quiet. Who authorized her? The answer came, without pause, from somewhere near the wall. She didn't wait to be outside. Nora kept walking. Her boots crossed the concrete without sound beyond the scuff of tread. The red flare she had never used was tucked neatly back in her vest. Her grease pencil was clipped beside it, capped and whole. No applause followed. No recognition ceremony. No pat on the back. Only the quiet shift of a dozen people standing still as she passed. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She just did the work quietly, precisely, and without waiting to be seen. In a room where noise meant authority and confidence passed for competence, Nora relied on something else. Preparation. Focus. The discipline to be right even when ignored. Her grid was dismissed, then confirmed. Her voice, once doubted, was the only one that reached the breach in time. This story isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about showing up ready, trusting what you see, acting when it counts, even if no one calls your name. If you've ever been overlooked, talked over, or told to wait your turn, maybe this story was for you. And if it was, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who leads in quiet ways, and follow for more stories about silent strength that changes everything.